Hey guys, it's Jenna. In today's video, we are going to be going over the new Nars palette. I do have it right here in front of me. This is their Holiday 2022 palette, and Harvey is here for a quick little hi in the intro, but we're going to go over comparisons from other palettes. We're going to go over swatches, how it applies, basically everything you need to know about this palette to decide if it's worth it for you or not. So let's get started. So let's dive right on into this palette and start with the outer packaging. This is the outer packaging that you get when you order it from either Sephora or the Nars website right now. I'm not sure if there's any other retailers that are selling it. Do let me know down below, but this is the outer packaging and you can see the stars are shown on the outer box already. The theme for this holiday is stars. There's lots of stars on the embossment of the palette. There's lots of stars on the exterior packaging, and you'll see on the back you have all of the ingredients for all of the blushes, and then you'll see the palette itself, which is this beautiful palette. It is super stunning, and it's funny. Normally I would think this type of design would be quite busy on a palette. I'm usually one for very sleek, simple, classic packaging, and Nars kills it with their packaging. When it just says Nars on the top like this, it's super beautiful. The stars do busy it up a little bit, but I actually don't mind this one. I do think it's really, really stunning. Sort of like a platinum silver color. It does shine gold, like it reflects gold and has like a platinum silver quality as it shines in the light. When you open it up, now this palette, just like the other holiday one, so I have my gel nails on and I just like to kind of pry it in between that seal there. They're not the easiest to open. I don't know why. For some reason, these palettes, I mean, they're very secure, which is great, but they're harder to open than some other palettes out there. But here is the interior. So here we have the 6 brand new shades, and the embossment of those stars carries into the palette. You can see that right here. This one actually has quite a bit of variety when it comes to tones. We do have some brighter blushes. We have a peach color, a mauve color. We have a deeper blush as well in that corner. If you guys are familiar with previous years, especially last holiday, the formulation on this palette is very, very similar to last holiday. So if you weren't a fan of that, then keep in mind, I personally believe it is very, very close. This is the holiday palette last year. I actually thought that the design of this, like kind of like the caution tape with the Nars logoing, that to me was kind of busy. Like it's still busy, just like this palette this year, but this one seemed a little bit more sloppy to me, so I wasn't the biggest fan of the outer packaging. But the embossment also carries in this palette, so you can see that it is built similarly, but not quite the same. I'm going to show you guys some comparisons in a second, but it does have a nice variety as well, and that embossment with the caution tape is also pressed into the powders, just like last year. So same thing with this year. The stars being the theme on the exterior. I actually think that the embossment is a little bit raised off of the pans, but nothing too crazy where it's super, popping out and you have to worry about application consistency. This is actually a little bit raised, but not too bad. I do think this embossment is going to fade over time because it's not pressed fully into the pan. To me, this is kind of the perfect midway point, because if you have a very deep pressed embossment, you're going to get edging in the pan and you're going to have some inconsistencies when you're actually trying to pick up the powder with your brush. But this is one that's raised a little bit so you can see the design. It's not going to impact the coating of brush hairs when you actually try to pick it up from the pan. So that is very, very good. This palette is 60 American dollars or 80 Canadian dollars. I did see that Nars was offering this palette on their website for 20% off using code NARSFFF20. Not sure if that's still valid, but it is worth a try if you do want to save some money on getting this palette. But it is available at Sephora now. It was early access for Rouge for one day, and now it is on the website for Sephora Canada and the US. According to Nars, this is a 6-pan of brand new limited edition shades. The way that Nars itself describes this formulation is kind of interesting, so I'm going to share with you guys. It's like very technical. It says the translucent microspheres suspend pure pigments to form an innovative lightweight powder base that achieves maximum color clarity. That to me is very intense of a definition, but it does sort of make sense because it does have this really innovative kind of glow to all of these powders, as well as feeling incredibly lightweight on the skin. So it's actually really nice and skin-like, has a bit of that healthy sheen to all of them, and feels incredibly light, basically like air. So they're not lying, that's for sure. But I was like, what is this definition? It is so intense. I'm going to zoom in on the palette here and show you guys each of the shades very, very zoomed in. The first one is called Guilty Pleasure, and this is a rose gold. Now, Nars calls all of these, all 6, blushes. This first one has a decent shimmer component to it, so in my opinion, it could be used as either a highlight or a blush. And for myself, there's a significant rose gold pigment underneath this shade. It has a lot of color behind it, basically. So there's a lot of shimmer to it, but there's also quite a bit of that rose gold pigment. So this is going to give a bit of a streaky vibe on a lighter skin tone. So on myself, I'm going to show you guys really quickly when I applied it today. There is a lot of that rose gold pigment underneath. So that means it's going to be a bit streaky, especially if I want to try to get more of that glow. I'm going to end up applying more of it, and it's going to have rose gold streakiness instead of the highlight that I'm looking for. So I would personally use this just as a blush, but if you do have a deeper skin tone, you could potentially use it as either or because it does have a nice shimmer component to it. Although Nars calls this one a blush, I would say it could be used for either or, depending on your preferences. So going back to the palette again, we have Guilty Pleasure, which is the rose gold hybrid highlighter slash blush. Famous is a bright pink blush. Golden Age is a cool fuchsia. You can see it's actually really unique. I love this color. Limelight is a pink mauve. Paramount is a peachy coral. And Premier is a Bordeaux red. This to me just has a little bit more depth than last year's. I'm going to show you guys kind of side by side here. It's like more bold for sure. I mean, we have the Nars one from this year in my left hand or your right side, and then we have the last year's one. So last year does have some depth to it, but this year's definitely has a lot more bold, bright color, which is kind of different for Nars. I do think some people are going to be really excited about it. Other people are not going to be excited because if you do want more of that, you know, neutral, not so bright, this isn't going to be for you because it does have quite a bit of bright blushes in here. Now today I tested out the highlight, like I mentioned, which gave me a little bit of some of that rose gold pigment underneath. So I'm going to be using this one personally as a blush topper or a blush by itself. Today I also tried one of the brighter blushes, which is on the top row in the middle, and I also tried this one here, which is a bit more safe. It's kind of like a mauve color. So I did a bit of both, right? Tested both a bright one and more of a blush. Like this mauve is something I would normally pick up, so the brighter one is kind of like a change for me. Both of them had a very similar consistency on the brush. I actually used a dense brush to apply this. You can use any dense brush you would like, and you can see that the pigment, it is getting picked up on the brush, but it actually is very well controlled here. I like to go a little bit light-handed just in general with the Nars blushes because they tend to be quite pigmented, especially the blushes that are in their permanent line, like Orgasm, Orgasm X, that whole line there, it's very, very pigmented blushes. So I'm like very used to just like lightly tapping, right? Just to make sure I'm not going to get crazy over blushed. Here I'm a little bit over blushed, a little bit more than I would like, but I am testing out a blush palette today. So that's okay. But this is one that's actually very nicely controlled. So it does have that sheeny consistency to it that makes it very skin-like, but it's also very buildable. This one doesn't seem to be very pigment forward as the permanent line is. So you do have a little bit more of that flexibility to blend them out, to build as well, and it's not going to be as scary to over apply from this blush palette compared to their permanent blush line. How both of them applied is really beautiful. It almost looks very skin-like, like there's a nice flush to my skin. And these bright colors, even the bright color that I picked up on the top row, I was thinking this one's going to be kind of like clownish, you know, like a little bit too bright and bold. But they actually do, because of the formulation, because it has that sheeny quality and because it's not pigment overload, it's actually very tasteful. If you apply it with your dense brush and you go very light-handed and just build, you'll be surprised. You could probably use all of these shades or most of them. And I do like how it has enough depth to stretch over many skin tones instead of catering to one end of the spectrum or the other. This to me has a really nice balance. So I'm hoping that when you do purchase it, you'll be able to use most of it or all of it, right? And for myself, I'm going to use all of it. I'll be able to. Even this Bordeaux shade, I just have to go a little bit lighter handed. Now let's go into comparisons because I do have comparisons from last holiday as well as Orgasm on the Beach palette as well as Afterglow. So like I said, similar formulation for sure is last holiday. This is the, what's this one called? High Profile Cheek Palette. This year's is called the Rising Star Cheek Palette, but this one is from last year's. And you can see side by side here that we have very, very little overlap. Here are the comparisons between this year's holiday and last year's holiday. So last year's holiday is called the High Profile Cheek Palette. You can see that that one is on the left of each of the swatches, and on the right is the new palette. So you can see here that we have especially the two on the right. The two on the right have a little bit more of a similar component to them, and those are both the peachy kind of coral colors in each of the palettes. The other two are definitely more distinct, and I didn't find any other similarities between the palettes except for these two pairs, but the first pair is definitely more distinct. The second pair has a little bit of a stronger connection. They're a little bit more similar for sure. Now let's go over the Orgasm on the Beach palette. One of my favorites, actually. This one is called, Orgasm on the Beach. Wedging my thumb in there. Okay. Here we have this one. This one has got to be still my favorite Nars palette, period, when it comes to cheek products. So last year's holiday, this year's holiday, this one is still my favorite by far. It has two highlights at the top, so it's a bit of a different palette because it's not just all blushes. We have two highlights here and we have 4 blushes down here. There's a little bit of a creaminess to this formulation in this palette, all 6 of them, compared to the holiday palettes. So the holiday ones have more of a sheeniness, a little bit of a slight powderiness compared to this one. Looking at both palettes with the Orgasm on the Beach versus the holiday palette for this year, you can see that there's honestly nothing similar between them. I did end up swatching both of the peachy corals though, because that was the closest in my opinion. Otherwise, they're very, very different. We do have much more bold colors in this holiday, much more depth in this holiday as well, like darker shades as well. So I didn't find any overlap between the two of them, but when you actually see the comparison between Orgasm on the Beach and the cheek palette from this year, you can tell they're also different formulas. You can see the shimmer component on the Orgasm on the Beach shade versus this year's Holidays palette. They're different formulas, they also look different, but the Orgasm on the Beach is still my favorite. I hope that it's still available at Nars if you are interested in getting one of these palettes, but this is by far my favorite one. I'm not saying the holiday ones are bad, I'm just saying that I prefer this formulation in this one over the holiday palettes from this year or from last year. The last one I'm comparing this holidays palette to is actually this one. This is the Afterglow palette, and this one has also yet a different formulation. No embossment, of course. This one has some brightness to it as well, but when you actually see them side by side, like I'm going to show you in a second, there's not a ton of difference here either. I thought there might be some similarities to the Afterglow shade in Flirt, but you can see that the two bright shades that I swatched right next to them from this year's palette is not the same at all. You can see that they're all 3 totally different shades. I do think you'll be okay to get this holiday, especially if you're thinking like, is there any duplication or any similarity? Not really, honestly. So this is a nice one to grab if that's the only other Nars palette. Same with the Orgasm on the Beach one. Even if you have last year's holiday, there's really only one that's very similar. So I think they did a good job with at least being distinct from other palettes that they have. That is something that I applaud them for, especially if you like collecting these or you look forward to this palette every single year. Do I think this palette is worth it? Yes. However, kind of going to preface this by saying that if you enjoyed last year's palette, you will definitely enjoy this one because the overlap of the formulation quality is very similar. I do like this year's embossment style a little bit better than last year's, although it's busy with the stars. It's honestly not as busy in my opinion compared to the tape. I didn't like the tape as much. This one is a little bit nicer to me, so I like the outer packaging a bit better. But this one I think is more meant for those of you guys that want some brighter colors that still look natural on the cheek, which is beautiful. I love that because you don't want it to look too weird or too like off. You can apply this on the cheek and the first layer looks like it's just a flush coming from within, not glowy but sheeny, if that makes sense. So not a ton of glow, but it has that healthy sheen. So it's not like fully matte, but it does have that really nice quality to them. So it makes bolder colors a lot easier to wear and to pull off. It does have really nice depth to this palette, which I appreciate as well, so it will stretch over many people. If you love blush and you love last year's quality, you'll love it, but definitely skip it if you're not into bright colors and you're not into, especially last year's palette. If you didn't like it, this is very similar with formula, so don't get it again, right? But if you love blush, and you love brighter colors, and you feel like you want to get something that makes brighter colors look very natural and wearable to someone that might not always pick bright colors, this will be a palette for you as well. Hopefully this review is very helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and until my next one, take care guys and stay safe. Bye guys!